From titles being inspired by real battles to hiring real Marines for training, here are some of the most shocking facts about Heartbreak Ridge that you didn't know.
22nd of April, what happened is the Chinese waded across the Imjin and they launched their attack. And the British troops were immediately put onto the defensive. They immediately began to be cut off from each other. A campaign, and the US had lost thousands as well. The South Koreans, who were also fighting and shouldn't be neglected in this, had lost up to 8,000. But Chinese casualties overall were estimated at 70,000.
What makes Heartbreak Ridge stand out from most war films is that its title isn't just a catchy phrase. It's pulled straight from one of the bloodiest battles of the Korean War. The Battle of Heartbreak Ridge in 1951 was a real, soul-crushing fight that lasted over a month. Thousands of American and French soldiers fought against North Korean and Chinese forces for control of a single hill that changed hands over and over again. The losses were devastating on both sides, and the name itself became a symbol of determination, pain, and endurance. By using that title, Clint Eastwood instantly grounded his film in something deeper than just explosions and uniforms. Even though the movie is actually set during the US invasion of Grenada in 1983, the spirit of that earlier battle hangs over every frame. It's as if the ghosts of those Korean War soldiers are watching, reminding us that heroism isn't glamorous. It's costly. Eastwood's character, Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, even carries that weight. He's a man molded by war, hardened by loss, and still standing when everyone else has moved on. That's what gives the movie its raw edge. The title isn't just about geography, it's about survival and sacrifice. It tells you this isn't a story about winning wars easily. It's about the price men pay to keep fighting when there's nothing left to prove. The battle may be over, but the heartbreak never really ends. If you've ever watched Heartbreak Ridge and thought, wait, isn't this supposed to be about Korea? You're not alone. The movie's title comes from a Korean War battle, but the story actually takes place during the 1983 US invasion of Grenada. It's like two completely different wars living inside the same movie, decades apart. That mix of timelines threw a lot of people off, but it also gave the story a unique depth. It's as if Clint Eastwood wanted to show how war may change in setting, but never in spirit. In the film, Eastwood's character, Tom Highway, is a relic from another era, a man who fought in Korea and Vietnam, but now has to train a new generation for Grenada. He represents the bridge between old-school warriors and modern soldiers raised on politics and procedure. That clash of generations becomes the movie's heart. Highway's methods are outdated, his language is rough, and his patience is thin. But his grit is undeniable. By blending two wars, Eastwood paints a picture of a military stuck between tradition and change. The audience gets to see how the lessons of Korea still echo through Grenada. The film may confuse historians, but thematically, it's powerful. It says war evolves, but soldiers never really stop fighting their last one.
A local restaurant, conversing with his ex-wife, played by Marsha Mason, who I had a chance, also to meet and work with.
When you watch Heartbreak Ridge, it's not just a Clint Eastwood movie, it's a full Clint Eastwood experience. He didn't only play the tough-as-nails Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, he also directed and produced the film himself. Every line of dialogue, every wide shot, every training scene carries his unmistakable style, gritty, unfiltered, and loaded with emotion. Eastwood's fingerprints are everywhere, and that's what gives the movie its bite. By 1986, Eastwood was already a Hollywood legend, but Heartbreak Ridge proved he could balance raw action with real storytelling. He poured himself into the role, portraying Highway not just as a Marine, but as a man fighting his own aging, regrets, and loneliness. You can tell he wasn't just acting, he was saying something about himself. Like Highway, Eastwood was a veteran of his own kind, surviving decades in a brutal industry that demanded toughness and control. Behind the camera, he handled everything with military precision. He didn't rely on fancy effects or glamorized heroism. Instead, he focused on raw human behavior, men yelling, sweating, pushing through fear. Before Heartbreak Ridge ever made it to theaters, Clint Eastwood faced a real battle of his own, one with the US military. When Eastwood and his team first approached the Army and Marine Corps for support, the reaction wasn't exactly warm. The script was packed with profanity, rebellious behavior, and scenes that made Marines look more like misfits than heroes. The military brass thought the movie sent the wrong message about discipline and respect. They refused to cooperate, which was a big deal because war movies usually rely on access to bases, vehicles, and equipment to look authentic.
As extras, hired by Clint Eastwood and his production company. And when they weren't just kind of maneuvering around in the background, what they were doing was coaching us actors on how to act like Recon Marines.
Eastwood, being Eastwood, didn't back down. He went back, made a few tweaks to tone down the language and improve the image of the Corps, and tried again. Only then did the Marines allow limited cooperation, letting parts of the movie be filmed at Camp Pendleton in California. But even that uneasy partnership didn't last long. After watching the final version, Marine officials changed their tune once again, this time calling the film too vulgar and withdrawing their support entirely. It's ironic though, because the movie ended up becoming one of the most memorable tributes to Marine grit ever made. Eastwood's rough-around-the-edges gunnery sergeant Tom Highway may not have been the poster boy for military decorum, but he represented the raw toughness and leadership soldiers actually respected. The military might have disapproved, but veterans and audiences embraced it for its honesty, and that's what gave Heartbreak Ridge its lasting power. If you thought Clint Eastwood's Heartbreak Ridge was stretching the truth when a soldier used a credit card to call in artillery fire, think again. That wild scene was actually inspired by a real-life moment during the US invasion of Grenada in 1983. A soldier, caught in the chaos of combat with communication lines down, really did use his personal credit card to place a call through a commercial line and direct air support. It sounds unbelievable, but it perfectly captures how unpredictable and absurd war can be. In the movie, the moment feels half comedic and half insane, classic Eastwood storytelling. It's a scene that breaks the tension with humor while still showing the desperation of soldiers in the field. Eastwood loved blending fact with flair, and this anecdote fit his style perfectly. It reminded audiences that behind all the training and bravado, soldiers are still human, improvising and surviving in ways no manual could predict. That single scene became one of the movie's most talked about moments because it blurred the line between absurdity and authenticity. It also reflected Eastwood's knack for finding realism in the strangest places. While audiences laughed, real veterans nodded knowingly. For a movie that celebrates discipline and precision, Heartbreak Ridge is full of hilarious little mistakes, and fans love pointing them out. There are calendar errors showing wrong dates for 1983, medals and ribbons worn incorrectly, and even uniforms that didn't exist during the time the story takes place. One scene shows Eastwood wearing an outdated patch that Marines had already stopped using years earlier. The errors aren't hard to catch once you start noticing them, and over time, they've become part of the movie's cult charm. But here's the thing, these goofs don't hurt the movie. They make it feel more human. It's like a flawed gem that still shines. The authenticity of Eastwood's performance overshadows the small slip-ups. His character, Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, is so raw and real that viewers forgive every technical blunder. In fact, some fans say the imperfections match Highway's personality perfectly. Rough around the edges, but full of heart. The film community has cataloged dozens of these little goofs online, from continuity bloopers to factual mix-ups.
I've never seen any spectacle like this in my entire life. Don't ever PT. I've seen some pretty half-assed Marines before.
When Heartbreak Ridge was first announced, the US Marine Corps actually loved the idea. They thought Clint Eastwood was making a movie that would show the strength, toughness, and discipline of the Marines. They even allowed the film crew to shoot scenes at Camp Pendleton in California, which gave the movie a real authentic feel. For a while, everything seemed perfect. The Marine Corps got positive publicity, and Eastwood got access to real military equipment and locations. But then came the final cut. When officials saw the finished film, their smiles faded fast. The movie was raw, full of harsh language, rebellious soldiers, and a lead character who didn't always follow the rules. Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway might have been a hero, but he wasn't the kind of role model the Marines wanted representing them on screen. The film's portrayal of insubordination and profanity didn't sit well with the military's image of respect and order. Soon after the release, the Marine Corps officially withdrew its endorsement and distanced itself from the movie. It was a quick turnaround from support to silence. But the irony is, while the top brass might have hated it, many real Marines loved it. They saw themselves in those rough edges and sarcastic moments. Eastwood had shown something the official version of the military never could. The human side of soldiers who fight hard, speak freely, and still get the job done. That's what made Heartbreak Ridge unforgettable. The lack of military support didn't slow Clint Eastwood down one bit. In fact, Heartbreak Ridge turned out to be a box office success story that surprised nearly everyone. With a modest budget and no official military backing, it still went on to earn over $120 million worldwide. Audiences connected instantly with Eastwood's gruff, but oddly endearing gunnery sergeant Tom Highway. He wasn't polished or politically correct. He was brutally honest, funny, and full of heart. The movie's success proved something powerful about Eastwood's storytelling. He didn't need approval from institutions to win over the crowd. What people loved was the authenticity, the way Highway led his misfit platoon with a mix of insults, sarcasm, and old-school discipline. There was something strangely motivating about watching him turn a bunch of lazy recruits into real Marines. Critics were mixed at the time, but audiences didn't care. They filled theaters for Eastwood's sharp one-liners, emotional grit, and that perfect blend of action and character. The film also found a second life on VHS and cable TV, where it became a favorite among veterans and action fans alike. The military might have distanced itself, but the public had already made up its mind. Heartbreak Ridge was a hit, and Clint Eastwood once again proved that when he steps behind the camera, he doesn't follow orders. He gives them. Mario Van Peebles didn't just bring swagger to his role as Stitch Jones, he brought sound. In Heartbreak Ridge, he wasn't only acting, he was performing his own music. Those funky rock tracks you hear blasting through some of the film's scenes, that's Van Peebles himself. Before his acting career took off, he had a passion for music, and Eastwood, being the kind of director who loves authenticity, let him blend that into the movie. It gave the film a surprisingly fresh vibe for a gritty military story. Stitch Jones wasn't your typical Marine. He was flashy, cocky, and full of attitude. His songs perfectly matched that energy. The mix of funk, soul, and rock gave Heartbreak Ridge an edge that most 1980s war movies didn't have. It also made Jones stand out as one of the film's most memorable characters, a loudmouth who could sing, fight, and still win the audience over. Eastwood's decision to let Van Peebles contribute musically was another example of how he made the movie his own. He allowed real creative freedom on set, and it showed. The blend of serious drama with moments of humor and rhythm kept the story alive. In the end, Mario Van Peebles didn't just play a Marine, he helped shape the movie's heartbeat, turning Heartbreak Ridge into something more than just a war film. It became a story with rhythm, attitude, and soul. Most 1980s war movies came in fast and hard. Explosions, gunfire, victory, done in under 2 hours. But Heartbreak Ridge broke that pattern. Running for about 130 minutes, it was unusually long for its genre. Clint Eastwood wasn't just making an action movie. He was crafting a story about redemption, aging, and what it means to lead. He wanted audiences to live with these characters, not just watch them fight. That's why the pacing feels deliberate. Every training sequence, every confrontation, every quiet scene between Highway and his ex-wife builds towards something deeper. The extra runtime allowed Eastwood to explore sides of military life rarely shown in Hollywood war films. The boredom, the frustration, the loneliness. It wasn't all combat and heroics. By slowing things down, he gave viewers a chance to see the cracks beneath the armor of his grizzled Marine. You see a man battling not just enemies abroad, but his own regrets and the ticking clock of time. And it pays off. When the final act erupts into action during the invasion of Grenada, it feels earned. The emotional groundwork makes those scenes hit harder. Critics at the time said the movie was too long, but for fans, that length was the very thing that made it powerful. Eastwood knew that some stories can't be rushed, especially ones about men who've spent their lives running toward danger. Heartbreak Ridge isn't fast food. It's a slow-cooked meal that sticks with you long after it's over. When Heartbreak Ridge hit theaters, not everyone in the military was impressed, especially real Marines. Many veterans immediately pointed out that the recon training scenes in the movie were exaggerated or downright unrealistic. They argued that some of the drills shown on screen, like the chaotic field exercises and unorthodox punishments, simply wouldn't happen in a real Marine unit. To them, Eastwood's depiction of military discipline leaned more toward movie drama than actual protocol. But that's also what made it memorable. Clint Eastwood wasn't trying to make a textbook about Marine training. He was making a story about leadership and transformation. Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway's training style was harsh, unpredictable, and borderline crazy at times, but it reflected his character perfectly. He was an old-school Marine trying to whip a group of lazy, undisciplined recruits into shape. The over-the-top moments weren't about realism, they were about impact. Ironically, some veterans later admitted that while the movie's methods weren't authentic, its spirit was. The message about teamwork, toughness, and earning respect felt true. Real Marines connected with Highway's attitude, the mix of insults, loyalty, and tough love. One of the most powerful details in Heartbreak Ridge is that Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway's Medal of Honor wasn't just some made-up Hollywood decoration. In the story, he earned it during the real Battle of Heartbreak Ridge in Korea, an actual bloody confrontation fought in 1951. That tie between his backstory and the film's title gave his character real emotional weight. Highway isn't just another tough Marine barking orders. He's a man haunted by his own history, shaped by the trauma and sacrifice of real war. By connecting his past to that battle, Eastwood turned Highway into more than just a fictional hero. He became a living symbol of endurance. Every scar, every outburst, every lesson he teaches his men comes from a place of survival. He's been through hell, and you can see it in his eyes. That Medal of Honor isn't just pinned on his chest, it's carved into his soul. It also deepened the movie's realism. For audiences who knew about the real Heartbreak Ridge, that connection added authenticity. It reminded viewers that behind every war movie, there are real soldiers who lived and died for moments like those. Highway carries that legacy with pride, but also pain. He's the embodiment of the Marine who never stopped fighting, even when the battle was over. That's what makes his story hit so hard. It's not just fiction, it's reflection. Heartbreak Ridge didn't just make noise on the screen, it made history behind it too. The movie was officially the 1,000th film to be mixed in Dolby Stereo, which was a big deal back in the 1980s. Dolby Stereo was still fairly new technology then, and it completely changed how audiences experienced movies in theaters. Before that, most films had flat, single-channel sound. With Dolby, sound could move. Bullets whizzed past your head, helicopters rumbled from one side of the room to the other, and explosions actually made your seat vibrate. For a war film like Heartbreak Ridge, this upgrade was everything. The crisp, booming sound gave every firefight an extra punch and made audiences feel like they were right there with Eastwood's Marines on the battlefield. Even the quieter moments, like the metallic clatter of weapons or the echo of footsteps in a barracks, were more immersive because of the new audio depth. It also showed that Eastwood wasn't just old school grit. He embraced modern technology to make his storytelling even stronger. His approach blended classic character drama with cutting-edge sound design, something that kept him ahead of the curve even as a traditionalist filmmaker. That Dolby milestone might seem small today, but at the time, it marked a turning point in how movies could feel. For Heartbreak Ridge, it wasn't just about what you saw, it was about what you heard and how powerfully it pulled you into the chaos of war. When Heartbreak Ridge hit theaters, critics couldn't agree on what Clint Eastwood was really trying to say. Some saw it as a bold, patriotic salute to Marine strength and American pride, a story about discipline, loyalty, and redemption. Others argued it was the opposite, claiming Eastwood was mocking military culture by showing it as outdated, stubborn, and out of touch with modern times. The movie walked a fine line, and that's exactly why it still sparks debate decades later. On the surface, it feels like a tough guy movie, full of shouting sergeants, grueling drills, and battlefield heroics. But beneath that, there's a subtle sense of irony. Eastwood's Tom Holloway isn't a flawless hero. He's a man stuck between eras, fighting a new kind of war with old rules.